kept on the tradition of giving out flower baskets to our mothers, and what a great gift our mothers are to us from God. I think it was Martin Luther that said, beer is proof that God loves us, but I think we'd be better saying, that's true, but I think we'd be better saying our mothers are proof that God loves us. Just the motherhood is a beautiful gift from God, and certainly the bedrock of our society and our families and the like. So, as tempting as it is to do a message on motherhood from the scriptures today, I think it's more important that we keep moving along in our text. We are studying the fourth gospel, the Gospel of John, and we're in chapter 5, and we're going to start chapter 5 today. Remember, last Sunday we finished that chapter with the woman at the well and the beautiful truth that came from that. And we see these encounters that John records for us that don't appear in all the other gospels, the three other gospels, that appears here. And he's making a point with all the ones that he includes. The accounts, remember, he was with Jesus for 3.5 years. So we only have some of these accounts. And a lot of what we see in this gospel is not found in the other gospels. And there's great truth here. The last part of chapter 4, we saw where Jesus healed the nobleman's son in Cana. So he's up in Cana, up in the Galilean area, up here, right about that area. And we're going to see chapter 5, verse 1. He comes down to Jerusalem. This is another significant event that happens down in Jerusalem. And it's followed by a sermon from Jesus. And it's only, again, recorded here in John. So let's look at chapter 5, verse 1 with that. It says, after this, there was a feast of the Jews, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. Now, it says went up here. We would typically say went down, right? Because he's heading south. But we got to remember, north and south are directions, whereas up and down is up and down, right? Or whatever. It's up and down. But however you say that, elevation, right? So technically, it's they always referred to Jerusalem as going up, ascending to the city of David, right? That was the typical language. So regardless of what direction you're coming from, when you go to Jerusalem, you were going up to them. It says here, Feast of the Jews. Now there was 3 that were considered feasts of obligation. So any male over the age of whatever it was, 15 or 18, I can't remember. If you lived within 15 miles of Jerusalem, you were to go to Jerusalem for that feast. These feasts of obligation. There was 3 of them. One was, of course, Passover, and the Feast of Tabernacles, and something else. But so it's one of the other ones. I don't think it's Passover here, because it would say the Passover, it would say the Feast of the Jews rather than a Feast of the Jews. So it's probably, let's just say, Feast of the Tabernacles. I don't know for sure. But most attended, like the Passover, they attended this regardless of the distance. Some people would travel, 100 miles to get to these feasts. And like Jesus did. He's way beyond the 15-mile range, because coming from up in Cana, or from his hometown in Nazareth, he's way beyond that going down there. But he goes down, and it's recorded here for us. For Jesus, though, it was another opportunity to reveal himself as the Messiah, just like he did on a grand scale in Samaria. And we saw that in the previous chapter. He's got an opportunity for maximum exposure. Not just the people who lived in Jerusalem, but all these people that are coming in. And So there's that in verse 1. Now let's go to verse 2. It says, now there is in Jerusalem by the sheep gate a pool, which is called in Hebrew Bethesda, having 5 porches. In these lay a great multitude of sick people, blind, lame, paralyzed, waiting for the moving of the water. And then verse 4, for an angel went down at a certain time into the pool and stirred up the water. Then whoever stepped in first after the stirring of the water was made well of whatever disease he had. Okay. Okay, first, having 5 porches just means covered. These are porticos, gazebo type things that surrounded the pool. So these people could lay there. And they gathered in this place for a reason that we see in verse 4. Now, I believe, and most commentators hold, that this is a well-known superstition here. Verse 4 should really read, in my opinion, and we'll look at reasons for why I say this. Verse 4 should say, many believed that an angel would come down and stir up the water, right? And this is what they believed. The last couple words in verse 3 and the entire verse 4 is not in many manuscripts. And it was probably added as an explanation. It's an explanatory note of why these people with these incurable diseases would be at this pool. And they were just watching it. They're waiting for it to bubble. And then everybody would be a competition to see who could get in first, as we'll see here in a minute. So it's not in, just so you're keeping track of what translations it's not in. It's not in the American Standard Version, Alice's New English Bible. It's not in there. You can check with her on that. Which, by the way, something about Alice's Bible. You can tell when you look at it, if she's ever showed it to you, it's not just for Sunday mornings. That gets used all week long. But English Standard Version, the NASB, the RSV, and the NIV don't have this in it. All of verse 4 and the last couple of words of verse 3 where it says waiting for the moving of the water. So starting at waiting or ending at paralyzed would have been a period, and there would be no verse 4. So in all those versions, that's how it reads. Weymouth's translation, Wycliffe says that it was not part of John's original text and that it was added later as an explanation, probably a margin, a note in the margin that ended up in the text. And we've seen that elsewhere in the Bible where a marginal thing, and there's proof for it in the manuscripts. It is bracketed as a parenthetical in the Amplified, which means it was added to explain it. It's an explanatory note. That's the way it's rendered in the Amplified. Here's a quote from a Bible scholar named Trench. He says, from manuscript evidence, this verse and the last clause of verse 3 seem not to be by John, but to be an early insertion, at least as early as the 200s. That'd be because Tertullian apparently quoted this little section here using that verse there, and so that was in the 200s. So it was added as an explanatory note at some point in time. At least that's what I believe. Now, some surmise that the pool was actually fed by an underground stream, and it would periodically bubbles would come from the underground stream thing with captured air down there, and it would bubble. And it would noticeably disturb the surface, and then they'd all, okay, whoever's in first. But when you think about it, this isn't surprising. We're mesmerized by water, much like we are like fire, us humans are. We can sit there and watch water, just, especially moving water. And but even not water, just a pool of water. It is mesmerizing. And water is amazing anyway. It's required for life and all cleansing. It's no surprise to me that a superstition like this would arise that centers on water. But it's okay if you take verse 4 as just like it reads. That's always safe, right? Verse 4, it says, for an angel. It states it like fact, right? Our text says that, for an angel went down at a certain time into the pool and stirred up the water. It states it like fact there, but again, I believe that's an explanatory note, and it would be better rendered, for the people believed that at a certain time an angel would come and stir the water, and then the first one in wins, right? When you think about it, it's actually quite cruel if that were true. Wait for the bubbles, then the first one in. Even if you stomp on someone else on your way in there, well, what if it's a tie? Well, they fight it out, whatever. But it just doesn't seem right. But anyway, more on that in a minute. So a certain man was there, verse 5, a certain man was there who had an infirmity 38 years. 38 years. So he's a well-known local fixture, no doubt pitied by many. And who knows how many hundreds of days he appeared at that same spot. And he was a fixture there, just watching the water, waiting to be the first one in. Still never made it. And so look at this. Jesus stops by. When Jesus saw him lying there and knew that he already had been in that condition a long time, he knew how many minutes and hours of the 38 years. He said to him, do you want to be made well? So out of the dozens, it says a multitude here in our text and scriptures here, I'm going to guess dozens anyway, of lame and sick, it seems like Jesus picks the most well-known incurable case. 38 years he's been this way, and unable to stand or walk. This means that he has no muscles in any of his lower extremities at all in order to stand or walk. Even if whatever condition that he had was healed, this would be a year of physical therapy, you think, to get the muscles back so he could actually stand up. So just looking at the scene here, you got this multitude of needy people here. I'm going to read a quote from Spurgeon on this. And he's always got some really insightful things to say. He says this, a multitude of needy people were there, yet none of them looked to Jesus. A blindness had come over these people at the pool. There they were, and there was Christ, who could heal them. But not a single one of them sought him. Their eyes were fixed on the water, expecting it to be troubled. They were so taken up with their own chosen way that the true way was neglected. That sums up this whole event here, and I think why it's recorded here for us. This is like a picture of mankind here. We're all looking at the pool, and we're all sick and dying, and we're ignoring the outstretched hand of Jesus, and he's got the only one with a cure, but we've got our superstitions in our own way that we're going to, place our faith and hope in instead of him. It says here, Jesus knows our condition and exactly how long we've been suffering. Take comfort in that, even though I know many people are suffering with long time conditions. But Jesus knows and Jesus cares. He says, do you want to be made well? Seems like a strange question, doesn't it? Well, of course he does, right? Well, as we know, many cling to their condition and are well cared for, and they're free from all personal responsibility because it's the excuse for everything, right? Someone else does all the working and all the worrying, and their condition is their excuse for not having to worry about it. I mean, it's sometimes they really don't want to let go of it. And so he's asking them, do you want to be healed? And going back to our summary picture here, just this is all humanity looking to anything but Jesus, and he's right there. Jesus is asking each and every one of us, do you want to be made well? This is what he's asking all of mankind. And sadly, too many like their condition. Diseased and dying in our sin, our Adam condition that we all have. And this is, I mentioned this before. Everything that Jesus says and does is perfect. And so when you see some of the things that he says and you wonder why did he say it that way? Well, this is a picture, and this is why John is including this, inspired by the Holy Spirit, so we can see this account. Do you want to be made well? This is, again, like Spurgeon says, this is a picture of mankind, really, waiting by the pool, watching. Verse 7. The sick man answered him, Sir, I have no man to put me in the pool when the water's stirred up, but while I'm coming, another steps down before me. Well, without that explanatory note in verse 4, that insertion, which I believe is an insertion, we'd struggle to understand why what's he talking about, the stirring of the water and somebody coming and stepping in before me? Well, now we kind of know that it's a cruel competition. What kind of a cruel competition this actually is. While I'm coming, another steps in before me. So how many more hundreds of days will he be waiting there, staring at the pool? You see, it's every man for himself in this. And it's something that he needs a man for to get there. And it's something that we do too. It's an external thing. This is just how humans are. We're all focused on the internal. What did we see in the last chapter? God is seeking us to worship him in spirit and truth. He says, verse 23, but the hour is coming and now is that when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and truth. The Father is seeking such to worship him, not the external, formal, and ritual. But he says, I have no man. Yeah, there it is again. Mankind won't take the outstretched hand of Jesus. But if some man can help him with some mystical external ritual, we'll go for that every time. A human priest with some external ritual, confession, you name it, some ceremony, and we'll go for that every time. None of which can cure the disease of sin. Only Jesus. Baptism, some people look to that. Oh, baptism will say no. Spirit and truth, mass, all these things. Just like that pool they're all staring at over and over again, it can't provide the cure. Only Jesus can. And the beautiful thing is no man is needed for your cure, and no man was needed for his cure, as we see here. You didn't need a man to pick you up. And aren't you glad about that? Because there's one thing I know about us, me, and mankind, is they're going to let you down. And you don't need a man for salvation, and you don't need a man for a cure. Jesus will not let you down. Verse 8. So Jesus doesn't even respond to him, saying, or this business about, I don't have a man to put me in the pool. And so he didn't really answer Jesus's question either. He said, do you want to be healed? And that's his answer? Well, I have nobody to put me in the pool when it's stirred up. Somebody jumps in front of me. So Jesus says, rise, take up your bed, and walk. And immediately the man was made well, took up his bed, and walked. And that day was the Sabbath. Yeah. So, we got to notice, even though in the commentaries, I read several of them, and they try to attribute some sort of act of faith on the part of this man, I'm just not seeing it. Okay. This man did not believe or have faith or demonstrate his faith by actually standing up when Jesus told him to, that as if that was an act of faith. Jesus is doing this for his divine purpose, not because of the man or something he did. This is what we got to remember is he's working out his greater purpose, and it's not because of perhaps what we did. And this man is healed not because of his faith. He's revealing his power and his perfect purpose. We see in verse 9, immediately the man was made well. Now, you can't tell me he didn't feel the change right away, because he's 38 years without using muscles in his lower extremities, his entire waist down, apparently, because he could not stand or walk. And so that's atrophy all being reversed. That's muscles that weren't there. You can't tell me he didn't feel that change. And perhaps a lot of commentators think he was paralyzed. So all of a sudden now he's got feeling. I can feel my legs. It wasn't his faith that had him jumping up there. So take up your bed. Now that's a bedroll or a mat that he was laid on, and someone had to lay him on it because he couldn't even do that. I suppose he could crawl, and that's maybe how he tried to get himself to the pool when everybody else was jumping over him on the way in. But that day was the Sabbath. And you know the Pharisees are out on patrol because it's a feast season, right? There's a feast, one of the feasts of obligation. So the religious police are out on patrol. So we spent some time at the beginning of chapter 3 when introduced the interview between Nicodemus and Jesus, and explained that Nicodemus was a Pharisee, and that came to speak with him. And so we looked a little bit about what the Pharisees were all about and what they had done with the simple divine principles that were in the law, and what a mess they made of those, what a science project they made of them. One of them was the Sabbath, the rules about the Sabbath. Now, in the Bible, we know what it says about the Sabbath. Remember the Sabbath and keep it holy. That was under the law. Now, we're not under the law. We're not held to that as Christians, but they were. The Jews were. So remember the Sabbath, keep it holy. No work must be done by a man or by his servants or by his animals. On one day a week, 6 days a week, you work. And this was a general principle, and it was healthy. It was codified as a law, but it was for our own good. The principle is it's not to be treated like a normal work day. It was to be set aside as a day of rest, worship, and praise of God. And, as we saw when we looked at this, not content with that principle, the scribes and Pharisees set out to define what work is. Well, generations later, they had a comprehensive list of what defined work and what you can and cannot do, and specific limits on each activity, how far you could go, and this and that. Talked about all that. These rules and regulations were codified in what they call the Mishnah. And the section on the Sabbath alone is 24 chapters. All that from what the law simply said: remember the Sabbath and keep it holy. And it must be different than other days, and the other 6 days of the week. So the Jews set out 39 different classifications of work in those 26 chapters, or 24 chapters. And one of the classifications of work was carrying a burden. Well, in this case, he's carrying his rolled up bedroll here. And it falls in the category of carrying a burden. So let's look at verse 10. The Jews, therefore, said to him who was cured. Now, first of all, the Jews, this man is a Jew. So when John, in this gospel, when you see that phrase, the Jews, he's typically referring to, and almost all the time referring to, the religious hierarchy, the Pharisees. the religious establishment. That's how he refers to them. And it's as if he's using it in a derogatory sense. The religious establishment, the Jews. The Jews therefore said to him who was cured, "It is the Sabbath. It is not lawful for you to carry your bed." So it was really quite the scene, actually, because first of all, it's feast season, or it's time of the Feast of Obligation here. So there's a lot of people, and they knew the religious police were going to be out, and so everybody knew if you're going to carry a burden, at least put it under your robe or cloak or something so nobody can see it. This guy's got it rolled up on his shoulder, and he's got a big smile on his face, and he's high stepping it down the street because he just got his legs back after 38 years. And so grinning ear to ear. And maybe they're thinking, wow, that's the guy that was over by the healing pool thing. Maybe that's not quite a superstition after all. But again, the Sabbath police are out on control, and he's carrying a burden. That looks like work. Chapter, whatever, such and such, subsection 3. So this was their law, and this guy was facing the death penalty for breaking it. Here's the actual words of the law. If anyone carries anything from a public place to a private house on the Sabbath intentionally, and there's a key word, intentionally, he is punishable of death by stoning. You see what religion can do with the simple principles of God's guidance for man? So in verse 11, we're going to see that he's going to try to explain that, hey, it's not my fault. This guy that healed me said, take up your bed and walk. And but here in verse 10, I already mentioned this, but it's in my notes. The Jews, again, that's the religious establishment. Okay. So if you think that we've gotten past religious lunacy, think again. An example found in an April 9, 1992 news article says this: tenants let 3 apartments in an Orthodox neighborhood in Israel burn to the ground while they asked a rabbi whether a telephone call to the fire department on the Sabbath would violate Jewish law. Observant Jews are forbidden to use the phone on the Sabbath because doing so would break an electrical current, which is considered a form of work. So the article goes on to say, in the half hour it took the rabbi to decide, yes, it's forbidden to use the phone, the fire had already taken out 2 more apartment buildings. So this is what religion does. And notice that when he finally did figure it out that, oh yeah, that's work, his decision was, yeah, that's work. You can't do it. You can't make the call. So just amazing. But all right, verse 11. So he answers them. He says, he's trying to make an excuse because he knows he's in trouble here. He who made me well said to me, take up your bed and walk. What am I supposed to do? A guy just healed me. He says, rise, take up your bed and walk. And so, okay, they must have bought that excuse to say, who is the man who said to you, take up your bed and walk? See how blind they are? They don't even hear that he who made me well part. So somebody, no, what mattered was he broke their precious law. That's what matters. That's the only thing they can hear. And I think they probably knew exactly who it was, but they wanted evidence. They wanted, because they're building their case against Jesus already. They still remember a few months back at the Passover when he was there and he did all these healings and he blasted them during that. But we need to remember Jesus is carrying out his perfect plan, and this is all part of it, including him when he said, take up your bed, rise and walk. You don't think he knew exactly what was going to happen in the next, that they were going to see this and that this was going to, it gives him the opportunity to give a great sermon. So we're going to hopefully get to that today, and it doesn't look like we are because we only got 10 minutes. But yeah, including these religious fools. They're all part of his divine purpose. Verse 13. But the one who was healed did not know who it was. See, he didn't even know who Jesus was. Didn't have any faith in him. or anything like that. Didn't even know who he was, for Jesus had withdrawn, a multitude being in that place. So as soon as Jesus had healed him, said, "Rise, take up your bed and walk," he just faded out. And you can understand why. It said multitudes of sick people, lame, paralyzed, all these other conditions right there. And as soon as they see this guy get up and walk, he didn't even make it to the pool. So what happened here? And they would be looking to Jesus really quick and clinging all over him. He fades away. So somebody might conclude to themselves, because they're more loving and sympathetic than God, right? Than Jesus, they would say, well, I would have stayed there and healed them all. We're going to judge them? I think we miss the point if we say that in our hearts about Jesus, that should have stayed there and healed them all. He came here to heal the entire world and to bring us eternal life. And this is all part of his plan right here. Not just that several dozen that are surrounding that pool right there. So verse 14, and afterward, Jesus found him in the temple and said to him, "See, you have been made well. Sin no more, lest a worse thing come upon you." Well, there's much worse things than bad health or being crippled or even dying that can happen. We often look at Romans 1:18 and 19, where we see the wrath of God. And it says this. This is from the New Living Translation. Listen to this. Romans 1:18 and 19. But God shows his anger from heaven against all sinful, wicked people who suppress the truth. That's who it's on. By their wickedness, verse 19, they know the truth about God because he has made it obvious to them. You think Jesus just made it obvious to this man that he's probably the Messiah? Yet, sin no more, he says, lest a worse thing come upon you. Now, he doesn't know anything about the risen Christ yet. That gospel message is still yet to come to this man after Jesus is crucified, then the completed gospel, and he raises again from the dead. That completed gospel message will hopefully get to this man, and he will remember this. And maybe we'll meet him someday in heaven. But verse 15, the man departed, and what does he do? Go tells on Jesus. The man departed and told the Jews, this is the religious power brokers, and told the Jews that it was Jesus who had made him well. Now, he was no doubt, when Jesus saw him at the temple here, he maybe said, after he said, sin no more, and lest the worst thing come upon you, he probably went over, maybe even he went to John, the writer of this, and he says, well, what's this guy's name? And he says, oh, Jesus of Nazareth. So then he runs over and tells the Pharisees. And but what's this man doing at the temple here? We can guess that the Pharisees told him to go sacrifice for his sin of carrying a burden on the Sabbath day. Listen to this. This is from Lightfoot, pretty much saying the same thing I told you about. They get stoned for carrying a burden on the. But listen to this. Lightfoot says, whoever on the Sabbath bringeth anything in or taketh anything out from a public place to a private one, if he hath done this inadvertently, he shall sacrifice for his sin. But if willfully, he shall be cut off and stoned. So there's we see that if they considered it inadvertently, they would have said, you go to the temple and do a sacrifice for your sin. So this is probably why he's there. And Jesus, of course, knowing he'd be there, sees him there. And he wanted to make sure the guy knew his name so he could run and turn him into the Sabbath police. And so it seems like he's obeying his religious overlords here, this man that was healed. And he's at the temple sacrificing. But now verse 16 says, for this reason, the Jews persecuted Jesus. Again, we see who it is. For this reason, the Jews persecuted Jesus and sought to kill him because he had done these things on the Sabbath. Wow. We see the reason. He had done these good things on the Sabbath. They sought to kill him. And again, this is the religious establishment, those in power. We should always be wary of the religious and don't underestimate their ability to do very evil things. Sought to kill him. And they ultimately did murder the Messiah, the long promised Messiah. They've always been the enemies of God. Religious hierarchies have. And in the name of religion, all you got to do is be a student of history, just even a little bit. And you'll realize that some of the worst things in mankind's history were perpetrated in the name of religion. Crusades, the so-called Holy Inquisition, things like this, Holy Roman Empire. That's why I like that hymn that we sung today, Holy, Holy, Holy. And the thing I like about it is it says in there, only thou art holy. There is no holy father who has a big fish hat thing on. And there's no holy priest or holy pastor or anything like that. Only thou art holy. We could call the scriptures holy because they're the word of God, but that's as far as it goes. All right, God is holy. So where was I? 9/11. There's another in the name of religion. The Muslims perpetrated that, and on and on. So, and notice what their problem is here. He broke their law. So if we were to look in the actual scriptures and go, remember the Sabbath and keep it holy, we could go, what was broken here? Can a doctor not set a broken arm or tourniquet a artery that's open on the Sabbath day? Boy, what if a woman goes into labor on the Sabbath day? Well, that's bad timing. Of course not. This is ridiculous. So this is their scribal law. It's not in the scriptures. And so like we've referred to previously in Matthew 15, the Pharisees would say to him, why do you violate the age-old traditions of the fathers? And they knew they had to say it that way, because if they said, why do you violate the scriptures? He'd go, doesn't say that in scriptures. Tell me where it says that. You're wrong. It doesn't say that, because he, of course, knew. But their traditions certainly did say this. Their Mishnah on the things, the man-made stuff. So they had to say, why do you violate the age-old traditions? This was their own non-scriptural writings of the scribes. And to that he replies, why do you, by your traditions, violate the direct commandments of God? Wow. So he said there, and he says here, I broke no law. You are the lawbreakers. So verse 17, Jesus answered them, my Father has been working until now, and I have been working. Now, it sounds like he's not. What does that have to do with what they're talking about here? I've been working. Oh, working on the Sabbath. In other words, I've never quit working, and neither is my Father. You've seen the commercial, Never Not Working. Head and Shoulders, right? Right? Never not working. Well, that's Jesus. That's God. Never not working. God didn't need a rest after this, the 6 days of creation. God didn't need a rest. God doesn't take a nap. He did that for us. That was a pattern for us to show that seventh day, that you take a day of rest, and your body needs it. It's good for as a instruction manual from God to you on how to live your life best. Is that you take a day off a week. You work like a dog the other 6, but this day is different. You rest on the 6th day. It doesn't mean you can't tie your shoes. Remember, they even made it so you couldn't tie a knot. Oh, if you could tie it with one hand. You see, that was an exception. You could tie a knot if you could tie it with one hand. All right. Yeah, you get the point. So he didn't need a rest. God has never stopped working. And since they are one, Jesus has never stopped working either. So it's as if Jesus is saying, you accuse me of working on the Sabbath? Both God and I are working. And when I work, God is working. And when God works, it's me who's working. And they didn't miss this meaning either. This incensed them. We're going to see here, and I don't know if we're going to get there today, but they didn't miss this meaning. He said, my Father too. You know, they can say our Father, but when you say my Father, it's personal. They didn't miss that. They could say the Father or our Father, but so look at their reaction. Verse 18. Therefore the Jews sought all the more to kill him because he not only broke the Sabbath, but also said that God was his Father. See there? Making himself equal with God. So not only just like we can call God our Father, this is different. This was a unique way of saying it, and they got it. They did not miss the point. You see, it says he was making himself equal with God. They didn't miss the point. Now, our Jehovah's Witnesses, of course, the Watchtower, they missed the point here that because they deny the deity of Christ. But those of us who know that Jesus is God have this down pat. Now, I'm out of time, so we're going to have to, because this is right in the middle. So we're either going to stay here for another 45 minutes or we're going to pick it up next week. You can take a vote? All right, Brother Cam.